I want today to do a special welcome to the widow of the former chief editor, Kathy Cogley, who has joined us because we're actually giving out the first RGS 2020 Graham Cogley Award today. Therefore, I also want to do a special welcome to the recipients of the award, of which some are actually present today. So I have to start with a preamble. I made two cardinal mistakes. I have too much text on the slide, too detailed as a chief editor, and I haven't actually timed my presentation, so we'll see where that takes us. So as glaciologists, we're investigators of snow, ice, and everything else. So we should actually feel in our element here on Earth, because there's both an abundance of H and O, which combined into ice and snow and frozen kind of other materials. Then the temperature of Earth is fluctuating around the freezing point. So the permafrost people do not actually need. The recording just stopped, I heard. I don't know if we need to do anything. I'll just continue until Tavi actually says that we can't continue. So also on Earth and some other planets, there's seasonal and climatic changes that actually make the landscape interesting too. So I think there's a lot of different approaches that we can take as glaciologists. And the IGS was originally formed to actually accommodate all these forms of being a glaciologist. So the IGS and the two journals that I'm going to talk about are part of the IGS. The IGS is a learned society, sometimes called an academic association, and it was founded in 1936 to stimulate the interest and encourage the scientific study of glaciology, snow and ice in all countries, and also frozen things in all countries. It was founded to facilitate and increase the flow of glaciological ideas, and you either can do that in person or in print. So they soon decided that they also wanted to publish two scientific journals, or at least one at first. And now we also publish a news bulletin and books. At the moment, our president is Paco Navarro in Spain. Our Secretary General is Magnus Magnusson in Cambridge. And then we have one person who works for us for the membership, which is very important. That's Louise Buckingham. So right now, we're not just doing it in person and in print, but also online. And thanks to Tavi and the rest of our membership and non-membership, just the community, the online kind of continuation of the facilitation and exchange of ideas is really important. So everybody can become a member of the IGS, and membership benefit for many right now, it's mainly the money. And the money is quite a bit because you get 10% discount on the author processing charges for all Journal of Glaciology and Annals of Glaciology papers. And if you actually look at the dues at the bottom there, the dues are actually very low, and the savings that you actually make really pay back for that. So a lot of people actually become a member at the time that they're submitting a paper. So members also have gold open access to all papers through the Cambridge University Press website, and they get reduced rates for hard copies. And then, of course, the IGS is organizing symposia and other meetings, and for many symposia, there's a reduced rate for the fee for it. So being part of the academic community in general makes you sometimes want to change things, and the way to change it is sometimes to be part of such a learned society. So you can raise matters, you can vote at the AGM when you're a member, and you can also serve on the council and the committees. But we have national correspondents in almost every country. So if you have any questions, contact your national correspondent, because they've just been briefed, and a lot of those correspondents are brand new and young and very enthusiastic. So the Journal of Glaciology was the first journal established by the IGS, and it's one of the oldest scientific journals dedicated to glaciology. It's the oldest English printed journal. There was in Austrian before, and who knows, maybe in Japan or China or Russia there were some. So the first issue was published in 1947, and you can actually see an image of the cover of the first issue. And then the 257th issue was published in last June, and the next issue is due in August. So currently we publish 6 issues per year, and each year has a volume. So when you reference Journal Glaciology papers, you always have a volume, which is the year, and then not the particular, not 2020, but the volume sequentially, and then the particular issue within that volume. So for a long time, the journal was in print, and then sometimes a little bit online, but since 2016, we're completely gold open access, and that means if you're submitting a paper and you're paying your submission fees, or they're waived for some reason, then all the papers in the Journal of Glaciology of all the volumes right now are completely open access, okay? At the moment, in the last couple of years, the acceptance rate for papers has been fluctuating between about 50 and 60%. And I'll talk a lot more about the editorial boards of the journal and the annals, so I'll just leave that as a little note there. So the RGS chief editors, first they were only for the Journal of Glaciology and later for the journal and the annals. These are kind of the more prominent, longer serving IGF chief editors. And on the right side, you can see Graham Cogley and Hester Jiskoot. And those are the 2 that started when we went gold open access. With that start, we actually decided we have so many submissions and such a broad kind of submission range of topics that we actually need associate chief editors. So when Graham was chief, he was also associate chief editor himself, and we had 4 associate chief editors: Per Bartelt, mostly for the snow, Sergio Faria, mostly for the rheology, ice cores, things like that, and me for the alpine glaciers, and Frank Patin for the mathematics, together with Sergio, and numerical modeling and other modeling, and the ice sheets. Unfortunately, Graham Cogley actually became gravely ill in the summer of 2018, and then he died in October 2018. So I became interim chief editor and then full chief editor in the May after. So right now we have me as chief editor and 3 associate chief editors. And we also have a number of staff that helps us like online. Both of the people, Craig Baxter and Lindsay Rowland, are actually situated in Cambridge. But one is actually helping with kind of the front loading. Whenever you have a question about the system, it's Lindsay who answers, even though it tells you that it's just the editorial office. And both of these people have been with the Journal of Glaciology, Craig Baxter as production manager, for a really long time. So they really know their things, and I'm really grateful that I work with such a team, good team of people. So the current associate chief editors all have a hat, and each of them covers a number of papers. So a while ago, when we wanted to expand the scientific the editorial board, we tallied how many different topics we had to cover, given the submissions that we've had over the past years, and there were about 55 different topics. So each of those topics will be covered by also scientific editors, of which we now have about 30, but initially each paper goes to 1 associate chief editor. So each of us have like certain topics or share certain topics that we can actually have enough knowledge about. And then with the help of the expert knowledge of the scientific editors, we make a dual decision. So the current scientific editors on the Journal of Glaciology editorial board are listed here. Each editor, ACEs and SEs, have a 3-year term, and some of us And some of the SEs have actually worked for a very long time. Look at, for example, Stephen Jones has worked continuously as a scientific editor since 1992. He's an expert in sea ice. Also, Helen Fricker has worked for a long time. We all know what Helen's doing because she gave another talk in the seminar series. And then we also now have quite a few early career. We have about 15% of early career researchers as editorial board members as well, covering 13 countries, 5 continents. More about the diversity of the editorial board a little bit later. So how much do you think the SEs and ACEs and CE get paid for their work on the editorial board? Well, 0. We don't get any monetary compensation. They're all volunteer positions. They're all service components of the work that we're doing as either a professor or at an institution. You partly have to do a service component. And for myself, I've done many, many years of service as president for things and other things, stupid committees at universities. And what I want to do is serve both science and the scientists. And as an editor, that's kind of the best place where you can be in if you want to do that type of service. So the 4 ACEs get each some teaching relief because we spend about half a day to a day at the minimum per week on our work for the IGS journals. So even though we don't get anything, actually the reviewers of the Journal of Glaciology and Annals of Glaciology, they get a token of thanks from the Cambridge University Press, and they get some discount on CUP books. I've just been working that I thought it was not fair that the reviewers get something, but our SEs do not. So soon the SEs will also actually get an annual bigger thank you from the CUP. So the journal was the oldest journal of the IGS, and the Annals of Glaciology was established in 1980, and it's a thematic journal. And traditionally, the theme was really like connected to the theme of an IGS symposium. But right now, we can have thematic issues of the Annals of Glaciology that are not related to a symposium at all. So we just had one about glacial seismology. So we're now in issue 80 in June 2020, and there's another one coming out in a month. So for this journal, the Annals of Glaciology, we have 3 issues per year, and it's also got open access. The acceptance rate is really variable in terms of which theme it is and who submits. So sometimes we have 100% acceptance rate, and sometimes only 40%. For each of the themes, there is a volunteer editorial board for that particular issue. I, as chief editor, oversees all of those, because sometimes the ACEs will actually submit papers to their own issue, and then you need an independent ACE to handle those things. Usually the SE team is about 10 and really specialized around that particular theme. So there's a number of issues that will be published later in 2002. Progress in radioglaciology is almost ready to go. Sea ice interface had about 45 papers that will be accepted. It may be split into 2 parts. And then there's drilling through the ice, where the calls were actually still open. Now, because of the whole COVID situation, some of these annals were connected, or some of the future annals were connected to future planned IGS symposia. And because those all got canceled this year, some of the future annals are a little bit kind of shuffled, but there are, these are still on the books and will still be published. And some of those will actually have their call out later this week. But the numbers and the exact publication date is a little bit iffy on that side. So all the Journal of Glaciology and Annals of Glaciology papers are published through the not-for-profit Cambridge University Press. So that's really important that both the IGS and the CUP is not for profit. That's really different for some other journals. And CUP hosts like all the online material for us. So you can actually like look at the journal and the annals. You can also find all the information about the manuscript submission there. I'll tell you about some of that, but here you can see the links. So we publish 3 types of papers in either journal: articles that are longer, proper scientific papers concerning either new findings, new instruments of methods, or can be review articles. And since we've gone online open access, gold open access, there's no page limit anymore. It used to be 12 pages, but now it doesn't really matter. You still need to write a concise paper though, but usually the page length is between 10 and 15 printed pages. Now we introduced only last year a smaller version of that, so it will actually look exactly the same structure, but they're shorter articles and they're between 3 and 5 printed pages, and they actually have half the let's see here you see the article processing charges. For non-IGS members, they pay 10% more than the IGS members. An article, this is in British pounds, so it's about like euro right now. It's a bit more US dollars and more Canadian even. But an article is twice the article processing charge as a letter, and then that's more than a communication. So communications have a different structure. They're very short pieces. Sometimes they're comments. We've had in the last year a couple of comments on already published articles or letters. They can also be book reviews or brief correspondences on a topic. So all the manuscripts that are submitted have to be of high scientific quality, need to fit the scope of the journal, have to be complete and clear, substantially different from previously published work, including work in press, and need to be submitted in English. You can choose British or US spelling as long as you're consistent. Now, everything that we published in the journal or the annals is peer reviewed. So even if you have a very short correspondence, it will still be peer reviewed. So there's a lot of different journals that have a lot of really good qualities, but one of the things that I think makes the IGS journals really outstanding outlet for your research work is the whole combination of the qualities. Some of those I can actually point out. For example, we have timely, informed reviews by 2 external and 2 internal and 2 external reviewers. So both the associate chief editor and the scientific editor will review your paper, and because each of them is either a full expert or part expert, they will be able to judge like the reviews and choose the right reviewers if you haven't actually recommended it yourself. So all our editors are very dedicated and responsive to everything. The other thing is we have gold open access with a very modest article processing charge. Most other papers are quite a bit more expensive, and there's also possibilities for waivers. Now, the layout and the quality of the final papers is also quite a bit better than some other journals. We actually pride ourselves that we don't let, really poorly papers, we don't publish those because they don't go past all these levels of the review. Now, some of you may want to publish because of the history or some other things, but look through this list on the video if you want to see some more. So the IGS is also printing books, and right now it actually has 4 different books available, of which one you're just have the last chance to order a paper copy of the new edition of Columban Hunter's Fundamental Glaciology. Many of you have the old edition already on your shelves. If you're interested in that, this is Magnus's email, send IGS SOC, IGS Society. an email confirming your interest, include your name and your email and whether you're an IGS member, because then you get some discount on the book too. Another prominent book where we had a second edition for was Glacial Ice by Austin Post and LaChapelle. And then there's 2 smaller books. And Magnus is just working on updating the website, but you'll be able to find these books and more details about it next week. So there have been a lot of improvements made over the past years, actually continuously. I can't say over the past year, since 1947, but over the past year, we've really tried to like streamline the flow so that the processing time is actually reduced by 50 days in like 2 years. It used to be on average 50 days longer than it is now. There's a lot of different things, and what we've also tried to do is work on inclusion and diversity. So one of the things is I'm just presenting the Student Paper Award, but we also have now the RGS EGG, the Early Career Glaciologists, and they have helped us to compose an early career reviewer database so that we're not forgetting that there's a lot of expertise in either still students or early career researchers. And this is both to help early career researchers to get some experience in reviewing and for us to be able to tap into that expertise. Now, what you see on the right side, and I've been working on that since December, some things that you want to change are very slow. So when you register for your papers or as a reviewer, you traditionally always have to choose a prefix. And the prefix is actually an honorific, which is not too hard when you have a PhD, because then you can say doctor or prof. But it gets really old-fashioned when you're a woman. You still have to choose between Miss, Ms, and Mrs, for example. So we've now implemented 2 other choices. One of the choices is none. Unfortunately, we cannot actually choose none in terms of like having a blank space here. So if you don't want anything, you'll get emails saying, "Dear Hester Jiskoot." So just with your name, that's what you choose, the last one. It's still a required choice, but it's basically like no prefix. And the other option we introduced is the gender neutral MX, stands for mix. If that's your choice, then you can do that. So if you want to make your changes in the system today, you can actually log into either the JOG or the AOG, the Annals of Glaciology Manuscript Central account. So thanks to Chris Carr for actually pointing this out at the AGU meeting, and it took 6 months to actually change this in the system. So one of the other things in terms of diversity is we've always tried to attract younger people and to like stimulate their interest in glaciology, but also encourage them to actually do good work and encourage them to, you know, improve and be able to speak and write about their work in a really good way. So when the former chief editor, Professor Graham Cogley, died, his family, especially his widow, but also some of the other family, actually said, well, can we do anything for the IGS? And Graham was both a really good scientist. He made very enduring contributions to glaciology, but he was also very good in terms of outstanding service to the glaciological community, not just the IGS, but also IACS and other communities. And he was obviously our IGS chief editor. So this award was initiated and generously sponsored by the Cogley family in legacy and in memory of Professor Graham Cogley. And it's shared between the IGS and IACS. So in the even years, it's the IGS that awarded, and in the odd years, it's IACS. So this year, 2020, it's an even year. The IGS will give out 2 Graham Cogley Awards to students who have published papers of exceptional quality in the Journal of Glaciology or the Annals of Glaciology within the last 2 years. So we looked at how many papers were eligible for that. So there were about 70 student authors papers, or where the student was still within 6 months of their graduation date. So from those 70 student authors papers, 9 papers from 5 countries were actually nominated for this award. And you can see more details about the nomination. The nomination is done by ACEs, so the 4 ACEs of the Journal of Glaciology, and then each of the annals. They could nominate 1, 2. So if you want to know more about the details, you can actually look at the link. So of these 9 nominated papers, we have 2 award recipients, and I think they're here, so I'd like to congratulate them. I already contacted them a while ago, but they're Carlo Lucilli, from when he did his PhD, it was at the University of Heidelberg in Germany, and Paul Weber at the University of Portsmouth in the UK, who's still working on his PhD. Both papers, a full-stoke ice flow model to assist the interpretation of millennial scale ice cores at the high alpine drilling site Cogley, Swiss-Italian Alps, and an about 1899 glacier inventory for Nordland, Northern Norway, produced from historical maps. Both really play into the legacy of what Graham Cogley was actually really good at: glacier changes, mass balance changes, different scales of looking at it, and using different methodologies to actually look at a particular issue. The papers were of outstanding quality. So I'd like to congratulate the 2, and hopefully we can have some clapping hands here. So what do you get when you actually get the Graham Cogley Award? Well, you get a certificate, and it will be both printed and in a PDF, but you'll get it in the mail. There's award money for each of the students. There's an equivalent of 500 Canadian dollars. And then just like all the other awards, the Seligman, Crystal, etc. of the IGS, there will be a web page, and there will be in the annals, your name will actually for eternity be listed. And the award winners, the recipients, will present in this IGS Global Seminar Series on the 5th of August, and both of them will actually talk for about 25 minutes. So the other 7 nominees, I'd like to just mention their names and check out their papers. These were from 5 other different countries: Aviator Bach, David Bonin, Gabriela Colau Barrios, Joshua Lee, Alexander Alex Prowicki, Andrew Williamson, and Chen Yang Yang. So congratulations to those 2. So Kathy Cogley, the widow of Graham Cogley, I think she joined this this series. I don't know if she is actually available to talk, but she actually sent me something to read to actually make the remarks a little bit more personal when you're an award recipient. So she writes, "My name is Kathy Cogley. I'm Graham's wife, and Hester Jiskoot has graciously offered me an opportunity to say a few words on the occasion of the presentation of the 2020 IGS Graham Cogley Award. Graham did not like the spotlight, so there was never a family discussion about any type of legacy. When he died in October 2018, our family received many messages of condolence. As I read and reread them, I saw that several writers spoke about reaching out, sometimes tentatively, to Graham when they were students or early in their careers, asking him questions or seeking his comments. If you emailed Graham, your answer was swift, detailed, and supportive. Those recollections generated an idea for me where it might be possible to continue to support student excellence in Graham's name. Regina Huck had visited our home and worked with Graham and I and I was certain that she would give me an honest opinion. Could my idea become reality? And more importantly to me, would my idea be acceptable amongst Graham's colleagues? Now think about this timeline from October 2018 until July 2019, when the first IGS Graham Cogley Awards were announced in Montreal. You can imagine how many people from IAX and IGS had worked so hard on behalf of our family to make this a reality in such a short time. We will always be grateful. We also recognize that each year there's much work involved in the selection process and acknowledge your effort and energy. This year, to the students who submitted their work for consideration, your confidence will carry you far. To the recipients of the 2020 IGS Graham Cogley Award, our family offers you the most sincere congratulations and best wishes for your future. Thank you, Kathy Cogley. Thank you very much, Kathy, for this. And I'm sure the students appreciate it, and they will actually thank you. They will send you some thank you emails. So that was all the good news. So now there's a little bit of bad news, and then there's some education. Just on Monday, the journal impact factors were released, and we were actually quite disappointed for the Journal of Glaciology and Annals of Glaciology. We'd been quite solid in getting into the mid, like 3.5s, but we actually dropped in the last year from a journal impact factor of 3.2 to 3.0. It doesn't seem much, but we're just at this threshold of being in one category or another category. So the thing about 2019 impact factors, they're actually based on publications in 2017 and 18. So your impact factor is always behind to where you're now at as a journal. But still, this drop was a little steeper than we had hoped had happened. Annals of Glaciology always really fluctuates with the type of annals. So the number of journal glaciology items that are published in 17 and 18 are counted towards the citations that they had in 2019. Now, there's some reasons why this particular year is so low, and there's many reasons why we actually think it will recover immediately next year. So as we know, 2018 was a very difficult year for the IGS because Graham fell ill and then he died. And there were also, for that entire year, we'd had too few scientific editors. So the board, everybody was already overloaded. And then we had to rescue the journal in a way. When I started in September, there were 25 manuscripts that had not been processed. We actually, like me and Frank Patin, we worked really hard to put everything on the rails again. And we also increased the number of SEs from 15 to 30 within 3 to 6 months. And 2 of our then ACEs retired and then had to be replaced too. So we were all overworked. The processing time was really long, but we also that particular year had very low submission rates, 152 submissions. That was an all-time low for the Journal of Glaciology. So that was unfortunate, and that can really affect the journal impact factor for like a small specialized journal. So there's many strategies that we have taken in the last year or year and a half, and many of those are actually paying off already. So last year we had a 10% increase of our manuscript submissions, and right now we're actually halfway the year, we're almost at 100 submissions. So it looks really good so far. It's not just the number of papers that have been submitted, but also the quality has really gone up. So it's very good. So, you know, even though we're very disappointed, I think we're on the right way with like bringing the journal Glaciology into the modern world, making it inclusive and diverse for everyone. And as you know, one's reputation always lags behind one's real or current value. So now a little bit of education. The IGS editorial process and some tips for effective paper writing. So what I have shown here is a diagram that I've given to my scientific editors as well. And this will be part of the new instructions for authors. So just follow my red dot here, or black if you're colorblind. If you submit a paper, we'll check it if it's complete, clear, etc. And you are the author, you're in the black here. Each of these, it's like a little game. So every time you see a little black person or puppet, it's an author. When it's gray, it's the admin support. This is the chief editor, the associate chief editor, and the scientific editors, and then there's reviewers. So in this stage, you submit. If you're missing something, we can actually unsubmit it, and then like you have to resubmit it. Then everything goes past me, and then I will assign it to one of the 4 associate chief editors. If the scientific quality of the work is not good enough to actually send out to reviewers, we can actually reject it at this stage, or we can actually ask the scientific editors to give like a little second opinion. And that rejection is a rejection without review. So this happens with about, depends on the time of year and other factors, but between 10 and 15% of the papers is actually rejected without review. Sometimes they're resubmitted a year or 2 later, and sometimes these works eventually are published. So if it's good enough, we assign it to one of the 30 SEs. They read it and they choose a reviewer, or they go with kind of the chosen reviewers that you've suggested. The reviewers, usually it's 2, sometimes 3. They send the reviews in, then the scientific editor will assess whether the review decision needs to be a major or a minor revision. If it's major, you get a month to do it. If it's minor, you get 2 weeks to do it. So either of these decisions is a pretty good one, but it means a lot of work for you. So you do the revisions, the revised ones, you have to submit into the system again, and there's the admin and me again who can actually unsubmit it if it's not complete, for example. That will go directly to the SC. If it's a major revision, it may get to the same reviewers or to a different one. So it can actually be in this loop for a little while until your work is good enough that it's acceptable. The scientific editor does not make the final decision, but ACE. So the scientific editor makes a recommendation to the ACE, and that recommendation can actually be still a reject or an accept. When it's accepted, it goes into the production stage. You submit your final version. Sometimes there's like a couple of changes that you still have to make, even though it's accepted. Then the proofs are prepared, and you get to see the proofs and comment on them, correct them. I get to see them as chief editor, and the Craig Baxter, the production manager, gets to see them. So usually it's Craig who you correspond with then. Then once this stage is all completed, your paper will be online in first view, and compared to some other journals, that stage from this acceptance to first view online is actually pretty short because we're very efficient in that process. So eventually your paper will be part of a journal issue or an Annals issue. So all these papers, the different papers that were in first view, will go into the journal. That issue has a proof, and I see it, and Craig Baxter sees it. And then eventually the journal issue is published. So there's a lot of work of a lot of different people, and there's also a promotion phase that different parties have a play at, both when your paper is in first view and when the journal issue is actually published. So now, how do you write an effective paper? There's different components to that. There's the purpose and the content that need to be good. So this is actually before you start writing, it's more the scientific process. What is your scientific method? If you don't have a scientific message for a paper, then usually it's completely unfocused. You need to know what the knowledge gap is. It needs to be novel enough. So what do you need to say, and what do you need to say it? Do you need models and fieldwork? Do you need, different data? Do you need different methods or one method? You have to kind of think about what goes in that particular paper. Sometimes that means you need to add like a co-investigator, co-author, or a student author who is a specialist on one of these methods that you're not a specialist in. So most, it's very rare in, like, as we know in our field, to have single authored works. Most works are a combination of bright minds. Who do you want to read it? So is it for early career researchers? Is it narrow? Is it broad? Is it localized for like the Himalayan glaciers, or is it localized for Arctic sea ice or Antarctic sea ice? It depends a little bit how you're actually writing the paper. How do you want to say it? Do you want to have a long paper, short paper? What is the framework of it? What's the message? How do you want to write it? How long do you want it? What kind of tone does it need to be? Does it have review components in it? How many figures and tables do you want to do it with? Where do you want to say it? So eventually now we're actually getting to thinking about the journal. Does it need to be an open access journal? Does it need to be a high ranking journal? Do you prefer non-commercial, for-profit journals? Do you prefer a cheaper or a reasonable cost article processing charges? Do you like a certain style? Do you like open discussion or not? All those are considerations. And then when do you need to say it? Sometimes there's deadlines of different kinds. You either need to have papers published before you can defend your PhD, or there's the IPCC deadline, or grant proposals, or other things. So that's how to write it in purpose and content. And now in terms of presentation, now we get to how you want to write it. So now you're really, like, you've chosen your journal, you actually read through like what the requirements are, you've chosen your type of paper, your length, your structure, the tone, the voice, the clarity, the figures, tables, and equations, everything you can start writing now. So really think about the clarity and the writing style. I'm not originally British, I'm from the Netherlands. You may have noticed the accent. In fact, none of the ACEs of the General Glaciology are their first language is English, but our written English can be pretty good. But there's still cultural differences in length of sentences, construction of sentences, ways, like even logic and arguments are played out. So I'll give some examples. And then you think about the structure. So the most important thing is use the scientific language and tone. So here's two examples of very old books in the late 1800s. One is by a real scientist, Tyndall, and then the other one is by actually an amateur geologist. So look at the tone here. This one, it reads quite boring, the forms of water in clouds and rivers, ice and glaciers. Doesn't sound boring to scientists, but you know, it's pretty straightforward. There's no tone of like any consideration of the self or a judgment. Now look at this, glacial nightmare and the flood. A second appeal to common sense from extravagance of some recent geology. So that clearly is not a good scientific language and tone for a journal or a paper. Now here, this is kind of an old joke in a way, but I hope I don't offend anyone. And if I do, then it's just the Dutch directness that's doing it. There's a lot of cultural stereotypes in content and writing style. And there's this old question of, if you let a French person write a book about elephants, what will the title be? Well, it will be l'éléphant et l'amour. So I took that out of context and put what if you have a French person write a paper about glaciers. They would write le glacier et l'amour or le glacier et l'amour. Now, in the US, glaciers are fantastic. How to make glaciers great again? We actually need this with the current climate change. Germans are really known for making very long, windy sentences with very descriptive, okay? And there's some references here to books or literature or things like that. So the examples that I give here is just to show you that there's both a cultural background in terms of like how to present things, what is important, and the writing style. So don't take these things literally, and perhaps do not submit a paper with any of these titles, apart from this one, the Swiss. They're very straightforward, submitting glacier mass balance data to the WGMS, okay? So content and structure are very different. So if you write, I have 4 words here that I'm repeating over again in this sequence. So content are those 4 words, and the structure is where they go. So where they go within a sentence and where they go within a paper. So if you have certain content snippets within a paper, where they go within that paper will make a completely different story. So the 4 words are love, glaciers, study, and I. So I can put this in a lot of different ways, and even Yoda will say study glaciers, I love, for example. But what do you mean and what the reader gets from it may get misinterpreted. So even though your content may be excellent, you have to really like hammer on getting the structure right. And this is for both the entire paper and within paragraphs. Now, I just have to warn you, none of these phrases are fit or is fit for scientific papers because there's an affect to these. So in scientific literature, you never actually talk about affect. You never say how you feel about things. So what is the standard structure of a scientific paper? The short version is IMRAD. You may have heard of it. It's intro, methods, results, and discussion. Now, what I've written here is in black letters is the required parts of the structure of journal and annals of glaciology papers. And then the orange parts are optional, only if you actually like need them, for example. So IMRAD is still in here, IMRAD, but there's an S in between. We often like go in field and there's a study site. But to start from the front, title, authors, author affiliations, abstract, keywords, introduction, right? That is all required. Within the abstract, it's very important to have a very good structure too, and have paragraphs and have logical flow within that. But if you start to write a paper, start like just putting all the headers and subheaders. You can number them, or you can list them just as headers and subheaders. So then there is the results, discussion, conclusions. Sometimes people write a summary and they call it conclusions. You have to call that particular section a summary. Sometimes it's summary and conclusions. Acknowledgements, and then now we have data available on an offsite data repository with a DOI link. You may have supplementary material in your paper. You have to say where the link is, and the link is the same as the DOI that your paper gets. We store the supplementary material on the IGS CUP site together with your paper. Then there's author contributions, references, and the appendix. And then your supplementary material and data. Supplementary material gets submitted separately. They still get reviewed, but they don't really get typeset or anything like that. So that's the standard structure. There's there's kind of rules for writing effective papers. Think about the content and the presentation, what I just said, okay? Focus on one main result. Make clear what's good, unique about your work, how you fill the gap. It needs to be of high scientific quality. It needs to explain and inform. When you actually are a reader, you may not be as much of an expert, so you have to tell the reader, explain and inform. Structure and make each component self-contained and be consistent. It's much easier if you do something wrong, you've done it consistently wrong. Now, the 7th one is really important. If you know the rules, you can break them effectively. If you sometimes focus on 2 results, it may be actually better for that particular paper. Some of the common mistakes that I get, even at the page-proof stage, are about content and the title. So, not at the page-proof stage. Sorry, the content is at a much earlier stage. We sometimes get papers that read like thesis. A paper is completely different, needs to be more concise. But very often I point out some missing things in titles, or the title is too restrictive. If you've observed something but you didn't actually investigate the driver that much, do not put the driver part in the title of your paper. The abstract is often lacking structure. The logic in some of the sections is over-interpretation, or there's leaps from here to there, and it doesn't make sense in the way it's presented. The writing can still be poor grammar, spelling, syntax. It can be convoluted or inconsistent, especially if you have multiple authors. We can all see like different paragraphs are written in a different way. Very often, figures are not spell checked by the reviewers or the authors, and we quite often actually still find mistakes at the page-proof stage. Citations are notorious that there's some missing or the wrong style. You have to avoid excessive self-citation. There's like whole papers written about that. Cite yourself and cite others. Everybody benefits from it, but do not, like, if I see 20 times like one particular author, then it's excessive, and I'll ask if they're all needed. So how do you learn to read and write? Well, you read journals, author instructions, style guides of different journals, not just the Journal of Glaciology, but also other journals, so that you know what the range is. Read other papers, practice writing and editing, read about writing. I'll give you some books, and have several proofreaders. So sometimes we want to liven up scientific papers. Some things you always have to do: try and make really good graphs and diagrams. Try to think of a grabbing, really good, scientifically good title. Use good writing style. Sometimes you want to put jokes in it. Some people are funny, others not. We call them in glaciology Fowlerisms, because Fowler is a mathematician glaciologist who is notorious for really funny jokes. So some people try and emulate that. And jokes and figures. So here's a couple of very good figures, recent figures from the journal and the Annals of Glaciology. Here are some jokes in books. Here's, for example, a white rabbit in Coffey and Patterson, The Physics of Glaciers. Just look it up. Do it properly. Then there's also a reference of that in the figure caption. And here's another old book that I actually grew up with in my undergraduate. Look up in the index Intrepid Fieldworker, and it refers you to the Armchair Theorist. And you look up Armchair Theorist and you get Intrepid Fieldworker. So now we have something new. We have Twitter and there's memes. So you can actually find some more of them with each of the journal covers. By the way, if you want to submit a really good photo for the cover of the journal or the Annals of Glaciology, recently we've tried to match the cover with one of the articles that's actually in that particular issue. So that's something new in the Journal of Glaciology that we've just done. So there's a number of books that you can read. about writing papers. So I give you a list here of some really simple articles online and some books if you're kind of more serious about that. The IGS actually follows the Butcher's copy editing, that is the CUP standard. So if there's any like mistake about, do you need EG with a comma, with 2 dots, do you need it to have it italic or not, Butcher's is where I go to. So I think I accounted for this because I actually went over time. So there's a whole section that I will put this poster online. In December, I presented how we increase the diversity and inclusion on our editorial boards and therefore in publications. I presented this poster at the AGU. So we've already been working on diversity and inclusion on many different fronts in the IGS. But because I run out of time, I just have to go to the next week's speaker. And that is Doug McHale, who will talk about backyard glaciology during COVID-19, snow roller dynamics on his own car here. So I thank you, and I don't know if I have time for questions if people want to stay.
Thank you very much indeed, Hester. Are there questions for Hester? The way that we've done this so far is if people type yes or something like that into the, Frank, yes. Feel free to unmute yourself or I can find you. And
yeah, I think I'm unmuted. It's not a question, it's just a token of support. When Hester took off for a couple of months on a boat to sail in the Arctic, she left the care of the chief editing to me. And that's the moment that I realized what a huge amount of work this is. And therefore, I really want to thank her because it's quite a lot. And if you see from this talk, it is a lot of energy that she has put in this in order to revise or to renew the Journal of Glaciology and the Annals of Glaciology. So thank you very much, Hester.
Thanks, Frank. I couldn't do it without you.
No. I cannot do without you.
is there any other questions from anyone? So I guess the Annals journals that are coming on, they will not be associated with conferences this time around, I guess.
There's still some conferences planned. So like next week, there should be a call out from Helen Fricker. So there is still a conference planned in La Jolla. There's still the Iceland conference about the warming climate still planned. And so the call is out, but if there's no conference, there's still the call out for the paper. But we've, the closest conference is next summer. So we'll have to see. What we're also considering is a proposal that will actually come from Doug, for example, that there can now be annals without the theme of a symposium. So it could be like a specific type of cluster of papers that is really appropriate for this COVID time. Because people cannot go in the field, they can't actually go to their offices or things like that. There's certain things that are, you know, maybe not considered for a number of other journals, scientific journals, that are really appropriate to just pick up for a special annals issue.
Paco has a, oops. You're muted.
Yeah. Hi, Hester.
Hi.
Can you listen me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, congratulations for your presentation. Has been really clear and really informative, and we got a good overview of the whole work by the editorial team. I have a question about your personal view of the future of Annals, just your personal view, because it has been so, all of us know that it has been going up and down from Q1, so the quartile one to 2, sometimes to 3, to 2, getting many submissions at some particular spots in time, but then getting really few and forcing us to fight to get submissions. And it has been sometimes discussed about the possibility to make of it a data paper. So there have been so many things around that. What is your personal view on this?
So there's two issues there. One is, I think when there's an annals call, people are not always that concerned about the quantile that it's in or the impact factor. It's just that the papers are all bundled together, especially if it's also related to a symposium. But it's a very nice way to actually like come together with a smaller community and like bring that topic like to the forefront, and that's just been done. Our submissions have been quite good actually over the past year. We've had at least 20 or 25 submissions for each of the annals in the past year, and we've had up to like 45 submissions for the CIs. I don't have a long answer. I mean, I do have a long answer. I think an important issue to consider is, if we didn't have the annals, would those papers be submitted to the journal? So are we actually bringing the submissions and the quality of submissions? Some of the annals have been very high quality. So if those papers instead would be submitted to the journal, then we'd actually like help the journal, like at least with the impact factor on par with what we think in terms of quality, we are on par with other journals.
Yeah, but so in particular, the history of annals, it didn't exist before. And then at some time, I guess that the journal in the old times was sometimes publishing some thematic volumes, but then it was associated to the journal, to the symposia, and then they were just by definition thematic. But now at present, again, there are many journals who are just publishing issues who are thematic. And so my question was more in that sense, whether you think that having thematic issues of the journal would be a possibly good alternative to having the annals, or maybe better to keep the annals?
I'm not adverse to it. I'd have to see. Also, in what way would it then affect our symposium? Because it kind of goes two ways if it affects the symposium. I think it could be a good solution. What you see often in other journals is that the special issue is actually not from one paper, and it's just like an online special issue, but the papers were actually published like at different times, even sometimes a year or a year and a half apart. Whereas like we actually bundle it all together. There really is a stricter deadline and focus for it.
There's a question.
We can talk about that some other time, Paco.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, thank you.
There's a question on the chat from Sophie Goliber asking whether you would be happy to share the slides with the early career researchers.
Yeah, I can send the PDF to the IGS egg, for example, and then they can post it. Or we can post it on the IGS website. I also want to post the poster about the diversity on there. So I'll talk with Magnus about that. I'd be happy to share.
There's a question from Matthew Siegfried. You're unmuted, Matthew.
Thanks, Tavi. So my very favorite issue of the Journal of Glaciology is the special issue from 1987 that was the 40th anniversary of the journal.
Right, this one.
Yeah. Those are some of the best papers I think that have ever been written in our field. No offense to the people writing papers these days. Gary Clark's paper is just amazing. If you haven't read it, please read it.
Yeah.
With the 75th anniversary coming up in 2 years, has there been any discussion about kind of doing an update to this? You know, we've had quite a few pushes forward, particularly when it comes to remote sensing in the past 35 years. I think it's getting to be the right time again for something like this.
Yeah, it's been on my mind. I've just been like really overworked. Some of the bigger issues I like go to the wayside because of this. But like I just want to also point out 2010 there is like a very good paper that I think should also be part of that type of issue. So it's both about the science and about the scientists, and we actually like have to maybe do a call for like what diversity is, and have a mixture of papers that are kind of pure science and just giving the history of the science, and about the history of the people behind the science, for example. But I agree with you, we should do a special issue of the journal on that. Are you, by the way, Matt, are you volunteering to write one of these?
Well, I was going to make a joke that since there's so many early career people on the editorial board now, that maybe some of the senior people have some extra time.
Are there any other questions for Hester at all? I think that's probably the end